Hi friends. Please subscribe and help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. It's just one click for you, but it means the world to me. Your support and motivation keep me going. A huge thank you to everyone who has already subscribed. I hope you enjoy today's story. The evening began like any other Saturday in Orange County. My wife Olivia and I pulled our car up the long palm-lined driveway of Jake's sprawling Newport Beach house, the sound of the Pacific crashing faintly in the distance. There was a familiar buzz of excitement in the air. This was one of Jake's monthly get-togethers, a carefully curated collection of friends and business contacts gathered in his glass-walled mansion overlooking the coast. Olivia was a knockout. Her white cocktail dress, a sleek, form-fitting number, seemed to draw every eye in the place. She'd always known how to own a room, and tonight was no exception. I caught the specific glint in her eyes as she flashed a smile at someone over my shoulder. She was in her element. Jake, our host, glided over to us, his smile as wide and white as the pristine sand on the beach below. We'd known him for years, and I was used to his particular brand of charm, but something felt off about him tonight. There was a predatory stillness under the surface. He was up to something. Liam. Olivia. Glad you could make it, Jake said, placing a hand on Olivia's bare shoulder. The gesture was meant to look casual, but it lingered a fraction of a second too long, an intimacy that did not escape my notice. Olivia let out a light musical laugh that seemed to echo in the open-concept living room, pulling the attention of other guests toward us. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Maybe it was just the Chardonnay, but I could have sworn Jake and Olivia exchanged a look, a flicker of an understanding that I was not privy to. I tried to shake it off, blaming the manicured, high-stakes atmosphere of the party. Soon, people were lounging on the oversized white sofas, the space filled with the hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses. Jake played the role of master of ceremonies, as always, effortlessly directing the flow of the evening. He was a genius at creating an atmosphere, breezy and relaxed on the surface, but charged with a hidden current of energy you could not ignore. As a lull settled in the conversation, Jake clapped his hands together. "All right, everyone, how about a little game?" It was one of those casual icebreakers he was famous for, designed to get people talking, to push the boundaries just enough to stay on the edge of innocent fun. But this time, something felt different. There was an agenda hidden in his suggestion that I could not quite grasp. The game started with harmless questions and dares. But the vibe shifted quickly. Jake made his next suggestion with the same casual air, but I saw his eyes lock onto Olivia. "Olivia, why do not you come sit on my lap?" he said with a lazy grin. For a beat, the room went silent. I felt the air get sucked out of my lungs. Every eye was on her, but her expression was a perfect mask. She hesitated for a split second, her gaze flicking to my face as if searching for a cue, for permission, but I was frozen. With a small tight smile, she took a step forward and, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, settled onto Jake's lap. The tense silence was shattered by a wave of laughter. Someone cracked a joke, and the moment passed. But for me, the alarm bells were screaming. I watched Jake's arm snake around Olivia's waist, saw her lean back against him just slightly. It was too familiar, too close. It set my teeth on edge. The game went on. With every new round, the dares became more provocative, and I watched a change come over Olivia. Her smile grew wider, more playful. Her movements became looser, more uninhibited. The shyness she sometimes had was gone, replaced by a boldness I had not seen in her before. Jake was clearly captivated. I watched as his hand, as if by accident, brushed against her thigh. I saw his gaze linger on her lips a moment too long. I wanted to say something to stop it, but the mood in the room was so light, so carefree, that my words felt trapped in my throat. At one point, when Olivia was dared to do something that to me was miles over the line, she glanced back at me. Her eyes were shining with a strange light, a mix of exhilaration and a thrill that felt dangerous. In that instant, I knew. My wife was hiding something from me, and whatever it was, the leash had just come off. I was on the verge of standing up, of calling Jake out, of dragging her out of there, but a darker curiosity held me in place. I wanted to see how far she would go. I watched her every move, a toxic cocktail of jealousy, fear, and a sick sense of doom churning in my gut. The game continued, the night reaching its fever pitch. The atmosphere in the house was electric, and the tension I'd felt from the start was now a crushing weight. The Olivia I knew, my wife, seemed to have vanished, replaced by a stranger I barely recognized. She was the center of attention, her movements confident, her eyes burning with an excitement I could not decipher. She was completely caught up in the game, and I had the sinking feeling she would do anything to keep playing. Jake, like a seasoned conductor, orchestrated the whole affair. His voice was calm but carried an authority that commanded the room. Every word dripped with hidden meaning. He suggested the next task, and it felt like a direct punch to my gut. "Olivia," he began, that same confident smile plastered on his face, "kiss Chris." He nodded toward one of the other guests, a tall, dark-haired guy who was watching the scene with an arrogant smirk. The room froze. Everyone stared at Olivia, waiting. I saw her body tense, but her face remained unreadable. She held her breath for a second, her eyes darting to me, as if for confirmation, for a lifeline, but I was paralyzed, unable to move or speak. Olivia took a deliberate step forward. I watched her approach Chris, her breathing shallow, the color draining from her face. She stopped in front of him. Her hands were trembling, but she lifted her chin and looked him straight in the eye. For a moment, the room was dead silent. She leaned in slowly, and their lips met. The kiss was long. Too long. It was not just a press of the lips, it was a performance, an act loaded with passion and provocation. Chris put his hands on her waist, pulling her closer, and I saw Olivia, after a moment's hesitation, melt into him. Their kiss deepened, and I felt something inside me snap. The room erupted in applause and whoops, but the sound was distant, muffled. I could not join their celebration. When Olivia finally pulled away, her expression was strained, but that same strange fire was still burning in her eyes. She walked back to her spot without looking at me, but I could see that the act had changed something in her. Jake looked pleased, a flicker of satisfaction in his smile. But he was not done. "Great, Olivia," he said with a low chuckle.
"Now, let us get a little bolder.
"How about you lose the blouse?" A chill shot down my spine. This was not a dare anymore, it was a dismantling. I knew that if Olivia did this, there would be no going back. She froze, her eyes finally meeting mine across the room. I could see the war raging inside her, the struggle to make a decision. Her hands were shaking, but she did not say no. As if in slow motion, her fingers moved to the top button of her silk blouse. The first button came undone. Then the second. Every tiny movement was a blow to my heart. She unfastened button after button, her breathing quickening, a flush rising on her cheeks. Finally, the last one was free, and the blouse slid from her shoulders, pooling at her feet and revealing a delicate lace bra. She stood there, slightly exposed, but with her head held high, her face a mixture of humiliation and defiance. The room erupted in a fresh wave of whoops and whistles, but it sounded hollow and wrong to me. Olivia had just crossed a line, a point of no return, and I was just standing here watching. Jake's smile widened, and I knew he was nowhere near finished. "Excellent, Olivia," he said, his voice laced with a sick kind of admiration. "And now, to spice things up. Kiss Chris again. But this time, really sell it." Olivia did not move. I saw her face pale under the track lighting, but that terrifying glint of determination was still in her eyes. She knew this was not a game anymore. It was something else entirely, and for some reason, she seemed ready to see it through to the end. She walked slowly back to Chris. Her movements were less confident this time, but just as deliberate. He did not wait for her to initiate. He pulled her against him, his hands gripping her waist, and their kiss was deep, almost rough. It was demanding, and I felt the bile rise in my throat. When it was over, Olivia returned to her place, her face a tense mask, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She had done something she never would have intended to do, and I knew she probably did not understand why herself. But Jake looked thrilled. He gave her a nod of approval, and I saw a strange, unspoken connection pass between them. When the party finally wound down, I could see Olivia was still reeling from what had happened. Her eyes were a storm of emotions she was desperately trying to conceal. We left Jake's house, and as the heavy glass door swung shut behind us, I felt like something vital had been carved out of our lives. That night was the breaking point, and I had no idea what was on the other side. The drive home along the Pacific Coast Highway was completely silent. The only sound in our Tesla was the quiet electric hum of the engine and the distant crash of waves. The silence was deafening. I had a million questions, a million accusations, but I did not know how to start. Olivia sat rigid in the passenger seat, staring out at the black water, her lips pressed into a thin white line. I could see her hands in her lap, clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. When we pulled into our driveway in Irvine, she got out of the car without a word and walked into the house. I followed, the weight of the night pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. I wanted to talk to her, to ask her what the hell that was, but the words were stuck in my throat. Olivia. I started, but she did not turn around. She walked straight into our bedroom, leaving me alone in the sterile, silent hallway. I stood there, feeling utterly useless. It was like one of those nightmares where you trying to scream, but no sound comes out. I pushed the bedroom door open and saw her sitting on the edge of the bed, her head in her hands. Her hair fell around her, hiding her face. The only sound was the sharp, ragged rhythm of our breathing. Olivia, we have to talk about this, I said, trying to keep my voice even, though a hot rage was simmering just below the surface. She looked up. Her eyes were full of tears she refused to let fall. Her voice was low, laced with a bitterness that stung. About what, Liam? About what happened? About what I did? I did not have an answer. It was a moment where words felt cheap and useless. I moved to sit next to her on the bed, but she flinched away, creating a physical gap between us that felt like a canyon. I just do not understand what is going on with you, I said, the honesty feeling lame. That was not you back there. She whipped her head around to face me, her eyes flashing with pent-up fury. You think that was easy for me? You think I wanted to do that? Her words hit me like a physical blow. I was speechless. Anything I could say would be wrong. Then why did not you stop me? She asked, her voice trembling with a raw anger that was aimed directly at me. I wanted to explain that I was frozen, that I was paralyzed by shock and a confusion so deep I could not think straight, but the words would not come. I just sat there in a silence that felt like a confession. Olivia shot up from the bed and started pacing the room, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were holding herself together. I could feel the storm of emotions rolling off her, a hurricane she could not put into words. Jake, she began, but the name caught in her throat like a curse. I knew what she was going to say, but I was terrified to hear it. Jake was the architect of all this. He was the one pulling the strings. Olivia, I do not know what to say, I confessed, the pain in my chest tightening its grip. I do not know how we fix this. She stopped pacing and looked at me, her expression one I'd never seen before. It was a terrifying mix of fear and utter despair. I do not either, she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. But I know one thing, I see a not live like this anymore. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The wall between us was real now, solid and insurmountable. She walked to the window and stared out into the manicured darkness of our suburban street, as if the answers were hiding somewhere out there. At that moment, the bedroom door swung open. Jake stood on the threshold. His appearance was so sudden, so impossible, that my brain could not process it for a second. He was perfectly calm, his face an unreadable mask, but his eyes held the same predatory fire I'd seen at the party. Jake? What the hell are you doing here? I asked, scrambling to my feet. A surge of adrenaline and rage shot through me, but I held it in check, trying to understand the new reality I'd been thrown into. I came to talk, he replied coldly, his gaze locked on Olivia. She spun around from the window, her face draining of all color. I saw her clench her fists at her sides. Talk about what? Her voice was strained, as tight as a guitar string. Jake took a step into the room, his voice dropping lower, but with an edge of steel. Olivia, you and I both know this is not over. I did not understand what was happening, but a cold dread washed over me. This was connected to the party. Jake had been pulling our strings all night, and now he was here to make his final move.
What the hell do you want, Jake?
I asked, my voice tight with a rage I was barely containing. He turned to me, his eyes filled with a dismissive contempt. I'm here for the follow-through, Liam.
Olivia started something tonight.
She needs to finish it. My stomach turned over. It was an ultimatum. He wanted her to completely submit to him, to follow through on the psychological demolition he'd started at the party. Olivia, he said, his gaze pinning her to the spot, you know what you have to do. You started the game. You finish it. Olivia stood as if she were carved from ice. I saw her face go impossibly pale, her hands trembling by her sides. She knew this was a crossroads, that there was no going back. But she was trapped, teetering on the edge of a cliff. "Olivia, look at me," I pleaded, taking a step toward her. "You do not have to do this." But she recoiled from my touch, her eyes wide with a cornered kind of horror. Jake pressed his advantage. "You're in too deep to back out now," he purred. "You know this is what you want." In that moment, I knew I had to do something. This was it. The moment to act, to save her, to pull her back from the brink. I moved forward, ready to physically put myself between them, but Olivia suddenly shot her hand up, stopping me. "Do not, Liam," she said, her voice a fragile whisper.
This is my choice.
I froze, a wave of disbelief crashing over me. She was going to do it. She was going to see this through to the end. Jake moved closer, placing his hands on her shoulders. I watched her squeeze her eyes shut, trying to brace against the storm inside her. He leaned in and whispered something in her ear, and I saw her face twist in a spasm of pure, undiluted pain. And then, something shifted. She snapped her eyes open and looked directly at me. There was something new in her gaze, something I had not seen all night. It was the look of someone who had made a decision, a terrible, costly decision. "Liam," she started, her voice shaking. She never finished the sentence. Jake recoiled from her as if he'd been burned. A look of confusion, then shock, washed over his face. She had refused him. In that silent, final moment, she had refused to play his game, refused to break. I saw it in her eyes, a core of strength that I thought had been extinguished. Jake, seeing the sudden rebellion in her stance, took a step back. The confident puppet master was gone. In his place was a confused man who had just lost his grip on the strings. His face contorted as the realization hit him. He had lost control. "What do you think you're redoing, Olivia?" he hissed, his voice trembling with fury. "You do not just get to stop." Olivia looked at me again, and her gaze was filled with a calm that felt like coming home after a long, brutal war. She took another step toward me, and I felt something in my chest unlock. She was choosing me. She was choosing us.
No, Jaque.
"It is over," she said, her voice soft but unbreakable. "I'm done playing your games." I saw Jake's hands clench into fists, his face flushing a deep, mottled red. He could not believe it. His perfect, cruel little drama was falling apart. He had lost his power over her.
You sa not do this to me.
He shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "You're already in too deep." "It was a mistake," Olivia replied, her eyes locked on his. "But I'm not going to let you destroy my life." I saw Jake deflate, his shoulders slumping in defeat. He stared at us, his eyes burning with impotent hatred, but he was out of moves. "Get the hell out of my house, Jake," I said, stepping forward to stand between him and Olivia. For a second, I thought he might lunge at me, but the fire in his eyes had died down to a smoldering ember.
The power was gone.
"You're going to regret this," he said, his voice low and ominous, but it was an empty threat. Jake turned and stormed out of the room, leaving a ringing silence in his wake. When the front door slammed shut, I turned to Olivia. She stood with her head bowed, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "Olivia," I began, but I did not know what to say. She looked up at me, tears finally streaming down her cheeks. "Liam, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice choked. "I do not know how I let it get this far." I closed the distance between us and wrapped my arms around her, feeling the rigid tension in her body finally begin to melt away. She buried her face in my chest, and I could feel her breathing slowly steady against mine. "It's okay," I said, my own voice thick with emotion. "We okay. We'll get through this." She did not answer, but I knew she understood. We just stood there for a long time, the silence in the room no longer feeling oppressive, but peaceful. In that moment, I realized this was never just about Jake. It was a battle for us, for the future of our marriage. Olivia had been pushed to the absolute edge, and in the end, she had chosen to come back. This awful, terrifying night had, against all odds, become the beginning of something new. Jake was gone. We had taken back our lives from the shadow he had cast over them. We had a chance to start over. When we finally pulled apart, I looked into Olivia's eyes and saw the woman I fell in love with. She was strong and she was vulnerable, and I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that we could overcome anything together. We left the bedroom, leaving the ghosts of the night behind us. This evening had changed us, but it had also forged a strength in us we never knew we had. It was the beginning of a new chapter in our lives, a life we would build together, no matter what. And that's where today's story ends. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, do not forget to like and comment. We'd love to discuss this story with you. See you in the next video.